I never thought I'd be here writing one of these posts. You know, the ones you scroll through at 2 a.m. with a mix of disbelief and pity for the poor guy on the other end. But here I am. A bit of context. I've always been the dreamer type. Ever since I was a kid, I looked up to people like Walt Disney, not just because of the cartoons, but because the man got knocked down more times than most people could survive and still kept building castles out of failures. That story stuck with me. Fast forward to adulthood. I had my own version of a dream. Not about cartoons or theme parks, but about building something meaningful with someone I loved. My wife, Emma, was that someone. When we met, I honestly thought she was my Mickey Mouse, the bright, creative, slightly chaotic energy that made my world make sense. We built our lives together over the years, a little apartment, a shared business idea, a small event planning startup, and lots of plans for the future. It felt like we were doing everything right. There were challenges, sure, sleepless nights, financial stress, arguments about priorities, but I always thought that was part of the building phase. I used to joke that we were our own version of the early Disney brothers, struggling now, but one day, we'd look back and laugh about how broke and ambitious we once were. But then, like a cracked reel in an old film, the story took a dark turn. It started small, late-night texts, excuses about work calls, subtle distance that didn't fit our usual rhythm. I brushed it off at first. I told myself she was just stressed or maybe burnt out. But you know that gut feeling? The one that whispers louder the more you try to ignore it? Yeah, it started shouting. I remember one night vividly. I was up late, working on a proposal for a client, when her phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, I don't check her phone. We've always had this unspoken rule about trust. But the message preview said something that made my stomach twist. You make me feel alive again. I froze. And in that moment, I swear I could hear that little voice, the same one that used to tell me to keep believing in dreams, say something entirely different. Wake up. That's where it really began, the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling until the sun started sneaking through the blinds, replaying that message over and over in my head. You make me feel alive again. It was such a simple sentence, but it hit like a hammer. Who was making her feel alive? Was I really that boring? Had I become background noise in my own marriage? By morning, I had gone through every possible scenario. Maybe it was an old friend. Maybe it was just something taken out of context. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I remembered Walt Disney's story again. How he lost everything when his own animators betrayed him and stole the rights to his first character, Oswald. That feeling of being blindsided by someone you trusted completely. I was starting to get it. When Emma finally woke up, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong, made her coffee, scrolled her phone. I was watching her like she was a stranger living in my house. I waited until she sat down and said, "Hey, can I ask you something?" She looked up, still calm. "Sure, what's up?" I held up her phone. "Who's making you feel alive again?" Her face drained of color. You could see the panic flicker behind her eyes, but she recovered fast. "It's not what you think," she said. Classic line. Every guilty person's first draft. I didn't say anything. I just stared. She tried again. It's a friend. Someone I've been talking to online. We've both been struggling with stuff, and..." I cut her off. "Stuff like what? Missing your husband? Missing honesty?" She got defensive fast, arms crossed, voice rising. "You don't get it. You've been so distant lately. All you care about is work and that stupid event company." That hit hard because she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been busy, but I was busy building something for us. I told her that every late night, every client I chased, every spreadsheet was for the life we said we wanted. And she just shook her head and said, "Well, I didn't sign up to feel invisible." That line cut deeper than the text message, because suddenly it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about failure. Failure as a partner, as a dreamer, as someone who thought love alone was enough. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just stood up, walked out, and sat in my car. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have a plan. And somewhere in that silence, I remembered something Disney once said. "All the adversity I've had in my life has strengthened me." I wasn't sure if that was true yet. All I knew was that adversity hurt like hell. I sat in that car for maybe an hour, trying to calm down, trying to decide what to even feel. Anger? Sadness? Confusion? It all mixed together into this numb fog. Eventually, I went back inside. Emma was in the kitchen, wiping her eyes, trying to look composed. That fake calm that only makes things worse. "I want the truth," I said. "All of it." She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. There was more. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "It's Mark," she whispered. My stomach dropped. Mark, as in my business partner. My friend since college. The guy who helped me start our event planning company from scratch. We'd been through bankruptcy scares, late nights, bad clients. I trusted that guy like a brother. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, half laughing because my brain couldn't process it. "Mark? The guy who stood next to me at our wedding." She started crying again, babbling something about how it just happened, how they'd been talking more since he and I had started arguing about the company's finances, how she felt like he understood her. That word, understood, burned in my chest. Because that's exactly what I used to think I was good at. I understood her. I thought I did, anyway. I asked her if they'd met in person. She didn't answer right away. Her silence was enough. I remember gripping the edge of the counter just to stay upright. Everything felt like it was tilting. My house, my marriage, my business, all of it built on cracks I hadn't seen. When I finally spoke, I just said, "You've managed to blow up every part of my life in one confession." She tried to come closer, reaching out like she wanted to hug me, but I stepped back. I couldn't even look at her. The person I loved had not only betrayed me, but done it with someone I considered family. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't know where I was going, just somewhere that wasn't home. I ended up at a cheap motel, staring at the ugly wallpaper and thinking about how Walt Disney lost Oswald the Lucky Rabbit because someone he trusted stabbed him in the back. He didn't quit. He went home, cried, and then created Mickey Mouse. I didn't feel like creating anything that night. I just felt broken. But part of me knew, if Disney could turn betrayal into a new beginning, maybe I could too. At least, that's what I told myself before things got even worse. The next morning, I woke up in that motel room feeling like I'd been run over. My head was pounding, my mouth tasted like regret, and the world felt unfamiliar, like I'd stepped into some alternate version of my life where everything I trusted had turned to dust overnight. I stared at my phone for almost an hour before I finally called Mark. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. Cowards rarely do when it's time to face what they've done. I drove straight to our office. It's a small space downtown. 2 desks, a whiteboard full of scribbles, and a bunch of event flyers we were supposed to finalize that week. When I walked in, he was there, sitting at his desk, acting like it was any other day. He looked up and froze. "Hey man, I was just about to call you." "Don't," I said. "Don't even start." He stood up, guilt written all over his face. "Look, I didn't mean for it to happen." "Then how did it happen, Mark?" I snapped. "How does sleeping with your business partner's wife just happen?" He tried to feed me some nonsense about how they'd connected when things between him and his own girlfriend were falling apart, how it started as emotional support. I laughed, a bitter, ugly laugh I didn't even recognize. "You offered emotional support between the sheets, huh?" He had nothing to say after that. Just stood there, staring at the floor, mumbling something about being sorry. But what hit me the hardest wasn't even the affair, it was what came next. He said, "I was going to tell you, man. I just didn't know how, especially since." "Since what?" I asked. He hesitated again. That hesitation, it's like my life's theme song at this point. "Since I've been thinking about leaving the company," he finally said. "Emma and I, we were thinking about starting something new." I swear the world stopped spinning for a second. Not only had they betrayed me personally, but they'd been planning to cut me out professionally. It was like losing my wife, my best friend, and my career in one brutal punch. I told him to get out. Not just of the office, out of my life. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just said, "You're done here." He tried to defend himself, but I didn't hear it. I couldn't. As I stood there, surrounded by everything we'd built, our logo on the wall, our shared files, our future plans, I realized that this was my Oswald moment. The moment when Walt Disney lost everything that was stolen from him. The difference was, I didn't have a Mickey Mouse waiting on the other side yet. Just an empty office and a heart that felt like glass. That night, I filed for separation and started drafting paperwork to buy Mark out of the company. I didn't even know if I could afford it. I just knew I couldn't share space with betrayal anymore. But here's the thing. As much as it hurt, a small voice inside me whispered something familiar. It's not the end of the story yet. And that voice would prove to be right, because what happened next changed everything again. The days after that were a blur of paperwork, silence, and sleepless nights. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, the kind with flickering hallway lights and neighbors who always seemed to be arguing about rent. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I'd stopped eating properly, stopped shaving, stopped caring. Everything I built was gone. My marriage, my business partner, my sense of purpose. I was barely functioning. Then, one afternoon, as I sat in that tiny apartment staring at a half-eaten sandwich, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it. But something made me answer. "Hi, is this Ryan?" the voice said. "My name's Laura. I work with the city's community outreach department. We came across your company's event portfolio, and I wanted to talk about a possible collaboration." For a second, I didn't even know how to respond. Collaboration? The company was barely standing. Mark was gone, our finances were in chaos, and I hadn't even told anyone what happened. But she kept talking. "We're organizing a local business fair for small startups. Your past work really impressed us. The creative themes, the details. We'd love for you to take the lead on the event design." I almost laughed out loud. "You realize my company's kind of falling apart right now, right?" She chuckled. "Then maybe this is exactly what you need to rebuild." That sentence hit me. Rebuild. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, just thinking. It felt like the universe had thrown me a tiny spark, like a test. The kind of chance that only shows up when you're at your lowest. I decided to take it. The next few weeks were hellish, long nights, zero budget, and constant self-doubt. But something changed. The work, the planning, the creative energy, it all started to feel familiar again. Like the early days of the company before things got complicated. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt alive again. Not because of anyone else, but because of what I was building. That fair turned out to be a massive success. Local news even covered it, and the event got recognition for its originality. And here's the kicker. A small investor who attended the fair reached out afterward, saying he wanted to fund my next project. Just like that, the ashes started to turn into something new. That night, I remembered Walt Disney's story again, how he lost Oswald, went home broke, and drew a little mouse that would change the world. I wasn't comparing myself to Disney or anything, but I finally understood what it meant to lose everything and still create something worth smiling about. What I didn't know was that Emma would come back into the picture soon and bring a whole new storm with her. It had been about 3 months since I last saw Emma. Long enough for the silence between us to settle into something cold and final. I wasn't checking her social media, wasn't asking mutual friends about her. I was done. Or at least, I thought I was. Then one morning, I walked into my new office, a small co-working space I'd rented using part of the profit from the business fair, and there she was, sitting in the lobby. Emma. She stood up when she saw me, holding a coffee cup like it was some kind of peace offering. "Hey," she said softly, as if the last few months had been a minor argument instead of a complete implosion of my life. I froze. Every emotion I'd buried tried to resurface at once. Anger, pain, nostalgia, even a tiny flicker of that old love. But mostly, I felt exhausted. "What are you doing here?" I asked flatly. She smiled, that careful, practiced smile I used to think was beautiful. "I heard about your event. Everyone's talking about it. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." Proud of me? The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, trying to find the person I used to know. But she wasn't there. Or maybe she was, and I just finally learned to see past the illusion. She sighed. "Ryan, I made a mistake. A huge one. Mark and I, it's over. He left. He's out of state now. I don't even know where." I raised an eyebrow. "That's convenient." "I'm serious," she said. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. Therapy, even. I wanted to apologize. Not to get anything from you. Just to say I'm sorry for everything. It's strange, I dreamed about that apology. I thought it would bring closure, or relief, or maybe some kind of peace. But standing there, I felt nothing. Just empty. I nodded slowly. I appreciate that, I said. But I think we're past the point of fixing anything. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know. I just needed you to hear it from me. She turned to leave, and for a moment, I almost stopped her. Almost. But then I thought about all the nights I'd spent in that dingy apartment, wondering how she could do what she did, and I let her go. When the door closed, I just stood there for a while, breathing. It felt like a chapter had finally ended. That night, I went home, poured myself a drink, and rewatched that old interview where Walt Disney talked about getting fired for not being creative enough. He laughed while saying it, laughed, because he knew every failure was just a setup for the next big thing. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Emma, not even at Mark. I was free. But life has a sense of humor. And just as I started feeling whole again, the next twist hit me out of nowhere. A week after Emma showed up at my office, I thought the drama was finally over. I was sleeping better, focusing on work, and for the first time in months, I actually caught myself humming in the shower. It felt normal, but then I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, again. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Is this Ryan?" "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Detective Alvarez from the downtown precinct. I'm calling about your former business partner, Mark Hensley." My stomach immediately tightened. "What about him?" The detective paused. "He's under investigation for fraud. We found your company's financial records during a search, and your name came up several times. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Fraud. That word hit me like a punch. Apparently, before Mark skipped town, he'd been using our company accounts to funnel money into a separate project, something he'd registered under a fake name. He'd been siphoning funds from our clients' deposits for months. And guess whose signature he'd forged on some of the transfers? Mine. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The betrayal I thought I'd already processed suddenly felt brand new. Not only had he taken my wife, he'd almost taken my reputation, too. The detective reassured me they didn't suspect me of involvement, but I'd need to provide documents and statements. I spent the next few days digging through emails, contracts, and payment records. Every new discovery made me feel sicker. It was like realizing the house you built together wasn't just standing on sand. It was standing on stolen ground. And that wasn't even the worst part. When I met with the detective in person, he told me something that made my skin crawl. Apparently, Mark hadn't been working alone. Someone had been helping him access company files and client data. When he showed me the name, my hands went cold. It was Emma. She'd given him passwords, client contact lists, everything. Even after I'd confronted her. Even after she said it was over. That apology in my office. That wasn't closure. It was damage control. I remember leaving the precinct that day in a daze, my whole body buzzing with disbelief. I'd thought I'd hit rock bottom months ago, but apparently, I'd just been standing on a trapdoor. When I got home, I sat on the couch and just stared at the wall. For hours. And then, slowly, something shifted. That numbness started to fade, replaced by something else. Not anger, clarity. They'd taken almost everything from me. But almost wasn't everything. I still had my name. My creativity. My drive. Walt Disney once said, "The difference between winning and losing is most often not quitting." That line played over and over in my head. So I didn't quit. I lawyered up, protected my company, and started turning that mess into a story I could own, not one they could ruin. Little did I know, that decision would open a door I never expected, one that would change my life completely. After the whole fraud investigation, I was mentally and emotionally done. I had no energy left to feel anything. Not anger, not sadness, not even relief. Just empty space where my old life used to be. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it's the only solid ground you can rebuild on. I decided to channel everything. The pain, the betrayal, the chaos, into something that mattered. I turned my focus entirely to my company, which I rebranded as Dream Frame Events. The name was a personal joke at first, a nod to Walt Disney's dreaming through disaster attitude. I started documenting my journey online, not as a pity story, but as a sort of therapy. I made posts on LinkedIn, wrote blog entries, even shared lessons learned from rebuilding after betrayal. I didn't name names or drag anyone, but I spoke about how to start over when everything you trusted burns down. At first, maybe 10 people cared, then 100, then 1,000. One day, Out of nowhere, a major online business magazine reached out. They'd read my posts and wanted to do a feature about entrepreneurs who turned personal crises into professional success. When the article dropped, my phone exploded. Emails, calls, new clients, partnerships. It was insane. Within a week, Dreamframe went from a struggling one-man operation to being booked solid for months. But the craziest part? One of the people who reached out was a creative director from a major entertainment company. She said my story reminded her of a modern Walt Disney arc, someone who'd been betrayed, lost everything, and built something magical from the ashes. She wanted to collaborate on a themed experience for a city event, something that combined storytelling, emotion, and creativity. Basically, she wanted me to design dreams. When I hung up that call, I sat there in silence. I thought about how months ago, I'd been sleeping in a motel, wondering if my life was over. Now, it was surreal, but success didn't erase the past, it reframed it. Every painful moment, every betrayal, every sleepless night had led me here. And when I finally allowed myself to feel proud, really proud, I realized something else. Emma and Mark hadn't destroyed me. They'd just cleared the stage for the version of me that was finally ready to show up. Still, life wasn't done surprising me. Because just as I was planning the biggest event of my career, someone unexpected came back. Not to hurt me this time, but to ask for something I never thought I'd give. It happened about 6 months after that article came out. Dreamframe was thriving. I had a small team now, real clients, and a studio that actually felt like it belonged to me. For once, my days didn't start with dread. They started with purpose. Then one afternoon, my assistant buzzed me. "Hey, there's someone here asking to see you. Says her name is Emma." I froze. I hadn't seen her since I found out about the fraud. I figured she'd disappeared for good. My first instinct was to say, "Tell her I'm busy." But curiosity, or maybe closure, got the better of me. When she walked in, she looked different. Not in a physical way, but in her eyes. The arrogance, the excuses, they were gone. She looked tired. Human. "Hi, Ryan," she said quietly. "You look good." I didn't answer. I just gestured for her to sit. She took a deep breath. "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to say this in person. What I did, with Mark, with the company, it's haunted me every day. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to know I've taken full responsibility. I even gave a statement to the police about what I did." I stayed quiet. Part of me wanted to yell, to ask why she didn't think of this sooner. But another part of me, the part that had rebuilt from the ground up, just felt calm. She continued, "You were right about everything. You were the dreamer. You believed in something bigger than both of us. And I was too small to see it." I finally spoke. "Emma, I don't hate you anymore." Her eyes widened, and she looked like she might cry. "You don't?" I shook my head. "No, I used to. I wanted to. But hate is heavy. I carried it long enough. I had to put it down to move forward." We sat there in silence for a bit. Two people who had built something together, destroyed it, and somehow survived it. Before she left, she said something I didn't expect. "You remind me of Walt Disney, you know? You lost everything and somehow made magic out of it." That hit me harder than I'd like to admit. Because hearing it from her, the person who'd been the source of my downfall, made it feel real. She stood, gave a small smile, and said, "I hope you keep dreaming, Ryan. You always were good at that." When she walked out, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt complete. Like her chapter in my story had finally been written, punctuated, and closed. That night, I went home, poured a drink, and stared at the city lights. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing something. I'd already caught it, peace. But just when I thought the story was finally over, something unexpected happened. Something that made me realize I was only in the middle of the next act. A couple of weeks after Emma's visit, life had settled into this steady rhythm. Work, gym, late nights at the office sketching out new concepts for clients. I wasn't chasing happiness anymore. I was building it quietly. Then one Thursday morning, I got an email that almost made me spit out my coffee. Subject line, "Partnership Proposal, the Walt Disney Company." At first, I thought it was spam. Some marketing gimmick using a famous name. But when I opened it, I froze. It was real. The message was from a creative executive at Disney's experiential design division. She'd read the article about my journey. The one where they compared my comeback to Walt Disney's early struggles, and she said it hit a chord with their team. They wanted to collaborate with me on a new community event series, something focused on creativity, perseverance, and storytelling. The theme? Every dream starts somewhere. I read that line about 10 times before it sank in. I had gone from sleeping in a motel, wondering how to survive another day, to being invited by Disney, the very company built by the man whose story got me through my darkest nights. I sat there staring at my screen, completely overwhelmed. My hands were shaking. I thought about how, when I was a kid, I'd stay up late watching documentaries about Walt, about how he'd been fired, cheated, and bankrupt before Mickey Mouse ever existed. I used to tell myself that if he could get back up after that, maybe I could, too. And now, somehow, I was being invited to work with his legacy. When I told my team, they went wild. My assistant actually cried. I didn't, but I came close. The next few weeks were a blur of calls, design proposals, and video meetings with people I'd grown up admiring. Every step felt unreal. One night, after a long call with the Disney execs, I sat alone in the office, lights dim, and realized something. This wasn't about revenge or proving Emma or Mark wrong anymore. It wasn't even about success. It was about becoming the kind of man who didn't give up when the reel broke. That partnership turned out to be the biggest project of my life, and the most healing. When we finally launched the event, there was a quote from Walt himself printed across the entrance banner. All our dreams can come true, if we have the courage to pursue them. As I stood there watching families walk through, kids smiling, music playing, I felt it. The full circle moment. But just when I thought that was the ending, one last surprise showed up. Something that reminded me that life's happily ever afters don't come in the way we expect. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sunlight slants just right through the office blinds, and I was reviewing layouts for the Disney event when the mail arrived. Most days, it was just bills, flyers, or the occasional client package. But that day, one envelope stood out. Thick, cream-colored, no return address. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly typed. Ryan, I've watched your journey from afar. I wasn't brave enough to face you properly, but I needed to say this before life moved on without closure. My heart skipped a beat. My first thought was Emma, but the tone didn't match her last visit. The letter continued. Mark was never the mastermind you think he was. Most of the decisions he made, the fraud, the lies, came after he was desperate. And yes, he dragged Emma into it. But she isn't the same person you knew. Life has a way of forcing people into choices they never wanted to make. I paused. I could feel a lump in my throat forming. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I want you to know that what you built, your courage, your persistence, has inspired people far beyond what you can imagine, including me. I read that last line 3 times. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the impact was immediate. Someone, a stranger, apparently, had been following my journey, seen my pain, and recognized that I'd turned it into something meaningful. The letter ended simply. Keep dreaming, Ryan. The world needs what you build next. I put the letter down and just stared at it for a long while. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what I'd accomplished. All the betrayal, the loss, the sleepless nights, they weren't just pain. They were the raw material I'd used to rebuild my life. And oddly enough, reading that letter, from someone who had no personal stake in my suffering, made me forgive everything. Not Emma, not Mark, not even myself for the mistakes I'd made along the way. I forgave the whole journey, because it had made me into the man standing there now. I realized then that Walt Disney's story wasn't just about losing characters or studios. It was about resilience, reinvention, and seeing opportunity where others see ruin. And somehow, I'd lived my own version of that story. Messy, painful, unpredictable, but real. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, a reminder of what I could achieve, even when everything seemed lost. Little did I know, the final chapter, the one that would cement everything I'd learned, was just around the corner. By the time the Disney event wrapped up, I finally had a moment to sit back and breathe. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to crises, tracking betrayals, or wondering if someone would stab me in the back. I was just present. I found myself thinking a lot about Walt Disney. Not the character, not the empire, but the man who got knocked down repeatedly and still built something bigger than anyone could have imagined. I realized that my story had its own parallels: betrayal, near collapse, starting over with nothing but ideas and grit. I thought about Emma and Mark, about how their choices had devastated me, and how I'd once thought that pain would define the rest of my life. But it hadn't. Their actions were painful, yes, but they were also the catalyst. They forced me to confront my limits, my fears, and ultimately, my potential. I also realized something else. The people who truly matter, the ones who cheer for you, who see your effort and not just your results, those are the relationships worth keeping. The rest? They're just part of the story that teaches you what not to tolerate. That's why I started sharing my story online, not for fame or sympathy, but to remind others that it's okay to feel betrayed, devastated, or lost. And that those feelings don't have to be the end. They can be the beginning of something stronger, smarter, and more resilient. One evening, as I wrote a post about how to rebuild after being blindsided by someone you trusted, I realized something profound. The betrayal that had felt like the end of the world had actually opened doors I never expected. Opportunities one wouldn't have taken if everything had stayed normal. I remembered the letter from that stranger, the one that told me my perseverance had inspired them, and I understood the truth Walt Disney had embodied. All the adversity I've had in my life has strengthened me. It wasn't just a slogan or a motivational quote. It was my reality. I started mentoring young entrepreneurs who'd been through similar betrayals, offering them advice I wished I'd had back then. I told them to grieve, to feel the anger, but never to stop building. And I reminded them of one crucial lesson. Resilience isn't just bouncing back. It's taking the pain and turning it into a force that propels you further than you ever imagined. For the first time, I felt fully in control of my story, not defined by what Emma and Mark did, but by how I responded. And that clarity, that sense of ownership, finally brought me peace. But even with all the lessons learned, the journey wasn't quite finished. There was still one final, unexpected twist that tied everything together. It was late spring when it happened, a warm evening with golden lights spilling across the city. I was heading into a local networking event for creative entrepreneurs, the kind of gathering I used to avoid because I was too busy stewing over betrayal. As I walked in, I barely recognized the room. Laughter, chatter, people exchanging ideas. It was alive in a way that reminded me of the early days of my company, before everything fell apart. And then I saw her. Not Emma, someone else entirely. A woman named Claire, a client I had worked with briefly before the company imploded. Back then, she'd been a quiet, reserved type who didn't say much, but now she was standing in the middle of the room, smiling, introducing people to one another like she'd always belonged there. She spotted me. Our eyes met, and she grinned. "Ryan, I've been meaning to catch up. You've been busy." We started talking, first casually, then diving into business ideas, mutual dreams, and shared ambitions. She listened in a way that felt rare, not trying to fix me, not competing, just genuinely interested. At some point, she leaned back and said, almost offhandedly, "You know, I always thought you were the kind of person who could take anything life threw at you and still come out ahead." I laughed softly. I used to think that too, before life had its fun teaching me humility. Her laugh was warm, easy, real. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was finally meeting someone on the other side of my pain. Someone who could walk beside me without the shadows of betrayal lurking in every conversation. We exchanged numbers, then went our separate ways that evening. But as I walked home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The past was still there, sure. A scar, not a wound, but it wasn't poisoning me anymore. For the first time, I felt hopeful not just professionally, but personally. That old Walt Disney spark, the one that had inspired me to keep dreaming through adversity, wasn't just guiding my work anymore. It was guiding my heart. Little did I know, the final lesson was about to arrive in the most unexpected way yet. By the time summer rolled around, I had a rhythm I never thought I'd find again. Dream Frame was thriving. The Disney collaboration had been a massive success, and my personal life was slowly, quietly stabilizing. I wasn't looking for love, revenge, or validation. I was just living, building, creating. And yet, every once in a while, I'd catch myself thinking about the chaos I'd endured. Emma, Mark, the motel nights, the fraud investigation, the betrayal that cut deeper than anything I'd imagined. And I realized something profound. All of it mattered. It mattered because it taught me resilience in a way nothing else could. I learned that trust can be broken, people can fail you spectacularly, and life can turn on a dime. But I also learned that those moments of devastation are the crucible for real growth. The moments when you feel like your world is collapsing, those are the moments that define who you truly are. I also learned to separate love from expectation. My marriage had ended, yes, and it had hurt more than I thought possible. But I didn't let that pain convince me that all relationships were doomed. I learned to see the difference between someone who supports you and someone who drains you, between someone who builds with you and someone who destroys with you. And most importantly, I learned to forgive, not to forget, not to condone what happened, but to free myself from carrying the bitterness. The forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me. I began sharing this journey openly, not just the fairy tale comeback parts, but the raw, ugly, betrayal-laden chapters too. I wanted people to understand that failure, heartbreak, and betrayal aren't the end. They're the prelude to something stronger, smarter, and more enduring. Walt Disney once said, "All the adversity I've had in my life has strengthened me, and I even think of it as good." I get that now, and I think that's the key. Life will knock you down, sometimes brutally. People you love may hurt you. Dreams may crumble. But if you hold on, learn, adapt, and keep creating, you don't just survive, you thrive. I'm not just telling this to brag or inspire. I'm telling it to anyone out there feeling betrayed, broken, or hopeless. You can rebuild. You can create your own magic. You can find your Mickey Mouse after losing your Oswald. And that's exactly what I did. All right, Reddit. Here's the part where I try to make sense of it all and offer something useful for anyone going through betrayal, heartbreak, or just life falling apart. First, trust your instincts, but don't let them rule you. I ignored the small signs at first, late texts, subtle distance, because I wanted to believe in the us I thought we had. That cost me a lot of nights of sleep and a ton of emotional energy. Listen to your gut, but don't let paranoia take over. Second, pain isn't wasted. Every betrayal, every setback, every sleepless night I endured became raw material for the life I'm living now. If you let yourself learn from it, you can turn devastation into a launchpad instead of a trap. Walt Disney didn't quit when he lost everything. Neither should you. Third, forgiveness is for you, not them. I forgave Emma, Mark, and even myself. Not because what they did was okay, but because carrying anger only slows you down. Free yourself first. Fourth, keep building. Even when everything falls apart, your creativity, your skill, your drive, that's yours. Nobody can take it away. I rebuilt my company, gained recognition, and ended up working with people I once idolized, all because I refused to stop creating. Finally, life's surprises can be amazing. Emma's betrayal almost destroyed me, but it forced me to grow. Mark's fraud almost ruined my career, but it pushed me to be smarter and more resilient. And the random letter, the Disney opportunity, meeting Claire, none of it would have happened if the earlier pain hadn't existed. Life has a twisted way of turning the worst moments into the best opportunities. So, if you're reading this, feeling betrayed or broken, breathe, feel it, cry if you need to, then stand up, rebuild, and create something that's yours. Because in the end, the story isn't about what people did to you. It's about what you do afterwards. And trust me, if you keep going, if you keep dreaming and building, the comeback can be way bigger than the heartbreak.